To begin the speaking portion of the program and allow you to leave early to go shopping. This is Christmas week, after all. We are absolutely amazed at the attendance here today, knowing how close we are to Christmas. But I think, and our guest speaker would agree, this is why New Hampshire is so unique, and we fight very hard to maintain first in the nation. The good residents of this wonderful state take their politics very, very seriously, and they are to be commended. But I think it's also a sign of why we should be and continue to be #1 primary in the United States. So I want to thank all of you for being here. Today is the New England Council's, I think I can say it with confidence, our final event of the year 2019. And what a year it has been for the New England Council. We have hosted a little over 80 events throughout all New England and in Washington, D.C., with all the members of Congress, the 21 members of Congress that represent all of us in New England, the 6 New England governors, the 12 United States senators. We have had cabinet secretaries speak to the New England Council. We had the Speaker of the House of Commons speak to the New England Council. And then today we have 21st presidential candidate speak to the New England Council, Politics and Eggs, here at St. A's, which is extraordinary. So I thank you for all of your support, and this event would not be possible without all of the wonderful corporate neighbors that you see. There's banners along the wall. They are truly outstanding civic corporate leaders here in this great state and in our nation. And if you see anyone affiliated with any of these companies, you should say thank you for supporting Politics and Eggs. This has been a great series, but it's only possible with the support of these wonderful, wonderful corporate citizens. We'll be taking a break from these events, but stay tuned for some announcements in early 2020. And we hope that many of you will also attend those. For purposes of introducing our very special guest here this morning, I could think of no one better to do the formal introduction than the man who has made this event such a huge success. As somebody in Washington would use that word, huge, but this has been a huge event, to say the least, and it's possible only because of the work of Neil Levesque, who has done an outstanding job. So for purposes, again, of welcoming our good friend, Tom Steyer. Neil Levesque.
Well, welcome. Welcome to the New Hampshire Institute of Politics at St. Anselm College for another of this great series. You're right. We're still hopeful that we'll have one more before the end of 2019. We will punch them right in. A lot of special guests here today and a lot of really good friends. These are people that not only support this institute, but support the college and all that we do here. And without you, we really couldn't do this, and so often. And thanks, too, to all the chickens out there who are producing all these eggs, because we keep serving them up, and it's great. I think we're running out of eggs in New Hampshire at this point. We have a very special guest here today, so special that even my sister, all the way from Maine, decided to come and join him. My sister Kristen is here. A lot of people know who Tom Steyer is, but I'm going to give you just a brief history that I think is very telling of his character and his background. Tom Steyer graduated from Yale. He didn't get into St. Anselm. And he earned his MBA at Stanford. He turned to San Francisco rather than going to New York and started a small investment firm. He produced double-digit returns for his investors, mostly universities and nonprofits and some individuals. In 2013, he switched his focus to politics and the environment and founded Next Gen America, a nonprofit group that aims to combat climate change, promote social justice, and increase participation in our democracy. Mr. Steyer then launched the Need to Impeach in 2017, a public call to impeach Donald Trump that got millions of petition signers and a couple people signing on in Washington. He and his wife then devoted countless hours of their time and donated tens of millions of dollars to charitable projects. In 2010, they signed the Giving Pledge to donate half of their fortune to charity during their lifetime. Wow. By the way, our Senior Vice President of our advancement, Jim Flanagan, is here today. Mr. Steyer most recently spoke here at an event in April. He spends a lot of time doing TV here as well when he officially announced his candidacy for the presidency. Now, I'm going to tell you that all across the country, when I go across the country or here in New Hampshire, I always get asked, what is with the belt? Now, if you've seen his ads, and I know you have, you say, there's a belt that he always wears, and people always ask me. So I had to ask him, and so there's a project that hopefully he'll talk a little bit more about in Kenya where their goal is to educate young girls. And of course, if you work on educating young women in a lot of these countries, it gives them self-esteem. An educated population obviously is better for a lot of these countries, and this is what that belt represents in Kenya, and I think it kind of goes along with your entire biography. So Tom, welcome.
Good morning. So let me say, I am impressed. December 23rd, really? It's amazing. We were talking about it, Jim and I were talking about it, and it really does say something about the commitment of people in New Hampshire to doing their homework and knowing what they're talking about in terms of the presidential primary. So, duly noted, amazing. I will tell you a little bit about the belt before I get going, which is, Neil's exactly right, but the thing that's true is it's not just about self-esteem when women get educated. When women get educated, which doesn't happen the same way boys get educated around the world, it actually changes the world. I mean, I wear the belt because the education of women will save the world if, in fact, we accomplish it everywhere. So I wear the belt because if I weren't doing this, I'd be doing that. It's actually incredibly powerful to understand how much it changes. As I like to say, of the 20 things that we can do to arrest climate change, 3 of them have to do with the education of girls and women. And when you think about that, you'd never think that that's one of the most powerful levers, or combined the most powerful lever in the world to combat climate change, but it actually is. So, just saying about doing a good thing can often have ripple effects that are hard to imagine around the world, and this is one of them. But let me explain for a second about why I'm running for president. I'd really like this to be question and answer as much as possible, so if you will prepare whatever your cruelest, hardest questions are, completely contrary to the spirit of the season, I'd be happy to take them. Look, I'm running for this really simple reason. I'm running because I think the government's broken. I think it's been bought by corporations. I think the reason that that the people aren't being served in terms of affordable health care, in terms of the end to gun violence, having some significant climate legislation, education, I really think is because it works perfectly for corporations. And I know I'm speaking to a business audience. I spent 30 years in the private sector. I believe in a vibrant, competitive, innovative private sector. I just don't want companies to write the rules. I want the government to work for the people of the United States and let the private sector work within the rules that serve the people. That's why I'm running for president. And I think Neil alluded to it a little bit, but I've spent the last 10 years putting together coalitions of Americans, ordinary citizens, to stand up for their rights and to push back when I think there's unchecked and unfair corporate power. And so I started it in California, my home state, taking on oil companies about the most progressive energy laws in the world. People thought it was like a reverse IQ test. If you're stupid enough to do it, you're definitely going to lose. And we got 70% of the vote. And so I've had a chance to take on oil companies, tobacco companies, utilities to get them to push them towards 50% clean energy by 2030. I've closed a corporate tax loophole that was just a mistake for $1 billion and gave it to the public schools. We got a $2 a pack cigarette tax, which the tobacco companies had fought for 20 years and won 17 times in a row, $3 to $4 billion a year, and gave it to Medi-Cal, which is the healthcare service for the lowest income Californians. I also started one of the largest grassroots organizations in the United States, Next Gen America, which Neil referred to, which in 2018 did the largest youth voter mobilization in American history. So we went into 38 Republican congressional districts, 421 campuses. I think we're on something like 40 campuses in New Hampshire, and we've been here since the beginning of 14. And we flipped 33 out of the 38. We more than doubled turnout of young people. And if you think about the New Hampshire law that was passed to say that out-of-state college students can't vote in New Hampshire unless they get a New Hampshire license plate, that was a direct response to college students voting at more than twice the rate that they'd been voting at, and winning, being the margin of victory for a lot of close victories in this state by Democrats. So really what I believe in is more democracy, more power to the people. It's really been 10 years of trying to push power down to the people of the United States because I actually trust the people of the United States. We were talking at breakfast about what have I learned basically running for president, and running for president is kind of a more intense version of what I've been doing for 7 years, which is to travel around the United States and talk to Americans and listen to what they're saying about their lives and listen to what they're saying about how the government affects them and the problems that they're dealing with. And so, I believe I've met an incredible group of people who are not atypical Americans, they're normal Americans, really hardworking, really decent, inspirational across the country. That has been my experience for 7 years, is to think the people of the United States are wonderful, just wonderful. And they do things every day that are tough out of the goodness of their heart. I can't tell you how inspirational, fun it is to travel around this country and meet people. And they are also, a lot of them are suffering. And so when I like to say, we use fancy language in politics. We use the language of Econ 101 and Poli-Sci 101, and it really takes us out of what's going on. Because the actual stories about what people are going through are the stories of human beings who are often really suffering. And so my attitude about this is a pretty simple one. We have more than enough money to do all the things we want, to have affordable health care, quality public education from pre-K through college, a living wage, pay people a living wage so one job can support a family, secure clean air and clean water for everybody. We can afford it, but we're definitely not delivering it. And the reason is it's not profitable for a lot of corporations. And that isn't a good enough reason, because what we've seen is, I think those are rights of Americans, and that's really what we're going to get if we break the corporate control of our government. And that's what I intend to do. But let me say, wow, you guys are quiet. Let me say this. People always describe me, I sometimes say that I'm going to change my name formally to billionaire Tom Steyer instead of just Tom Steyer. But let me say, so when I walked in this morning, I ran into someone who's the son of one of my parents' best friends in life, who's been running a summer camp in Hebron, New Hampshire for 22 years. So let me say this. My mother taught in the New York public schools and tutored prisoners at the Brooklyn House of Detention in remedial reading. My father, who was a partner in law of Vin's dad for years, was the first generation, was from Brooklyn, first generation in his family to go to college. My grandfather was a plumber. My father quit the law to go into the Navy in World War II. Ended up, because he was a lawyer, being one of the people who prosecuted the Nazis at the end of the war criminals. So one of the things that my father always said to my two older brothers and me was, if you see something wrong in your society, at the heart of your society, then fight it really early and keep fighting it. because I was referring to the Nuremberg trials. He said that's what the Germans didn't do. That basically when you see something wrong, you can't let it take root. And that really was a big part of why I started the Need to Impeach movement. There was something I thought consistently wrong at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. And I said to people when we started over 2 years ago, actually over 8.5 million people signed that petition. I said, if you don't believe me, read the paper tomorrow. And if you don't believe tomorrow's paper, read the next day's paper, because this is a pattern that is not going to change for as long as this guy's president. So I'll say two more things, and then I really am ready for questions. One is, you should know, I'm the only person in this race who will say that climate's my #1 priority. I say it because I have to, because it's true. It has to be true. I've been working on climate for more than a decade, and we've pushed successfully for clean energy, stopped power plants, fossil fuel plants, stopped pipelines. Taken on companies on this. But let me say, we have to do it. We can do it. I guarantee you, we can do it in a way that cleans up the air and water, particularly in the Black and brown communities that have air you can't breathe and water that comes out of the tap that'll make you sick. We can do it from that angle, and we will, and we can do it and create literally millions of good-paying union jobs. So when people talk about this, we have to do it, we can do it, and we can do it in a way that is just a win-win-win. Cheaper energy, faster growth, more jobs, healthier. But we have to do it, and we have to lead the world on it. If we don't look at this on a global basis, we're not looking on a realistic basis. You cannot solve this inside the boundaries of the United States. And so unless we lead the world morally and financially and technologically and commercially, we lose. And there's no other country that can do it, just to be clear. If you look at what just happened in Madrid, if the US doesn't lead, it doesn't happen. And so here's the good news. People are always asking me, how do we come together as a country? We're so partisan. I think this will be a very emotional, very competitive, that's a nice word for what I think, election. And how are we going to come together? I think everybody feels distraught about the divisions and partisanship in the country, and I do too. And what I can say is my experience of playing sports is, who loves each other? Winning teams. And if we take on the biggest challenge in the world, which we have to take on together, can't be Democrats doing it. It has to be Americans doing it. If we take on the biggest challenge in the world and succeed and reestablish ourselves as a moral, value-driven country, that's how we'll come together, is being a winning team together in pursuit of something we have to do and that we have to succeed in. And the last thing, I want to talk for 1 second about economics. We know what Mr. Trump is going to run as, because he said it about 10 days ago. He was talking to, I think, the Israeli-American Conference. I don't know if you guys read this quote, but he said, you guys don't like me, and I don't like you, but you're all going to vote for me, because if the Democrats get control, they're going to destroy the economy in about 15 minutes. That's what he's going to run as. When he's been impeached, he said, you can't impeach me. The economy will fall apart. It's like, really? So what I'm saying is this. He can win. For us to win, we're going to have a candidate who can actually go after him on the economy. We can't have a candidate where he can paint them as a socialist who will destroy the economy, because Americans care about growth and prosperity as well as economic justice. And after 30 years building a business from scratch, figuring out what creates prosperity, I feel like I have unique experience and expertise in terms of pointing out the fact that Mr. Trump is actually a fake business person and a failed business person. He actually played a business person on a reality TV show. And that he is actually a terrible steward of the American economy. If you actually look at the things he's done, they've been counterproductive and bad for American people. And so I think we need somebody who can take him on and take him down in terms of economics, because that's definitely, I mean, I'm not exaggerating what he said to those people. I mean, his basic campaign shtick is, I'm a criminal who hates 80% of America, but you can't afford to get rid of me. And what we've got to prove is we can afford to get rid of him. Because we actually can afford to get rid of him, we will do much better with a completely different understanding about what creates true prosperity and true growth and true success for Americans. And that is going to be something that we have to establish in 2020 and really talk to people about what actual productivity looks like in the United States, what actual value creation looks like, which is investing in the American people, a completely different idea than he's using in terms of what success looks like. And that has got to be a conversation we have, because it's a really different way of thinking about what we're trying to accomplish together in this country. So with that, I would love your toughest Christmas questions.
We have time for a few questions. We have students, I believe, that have the mic, and they'll rove around and just identify yourself. If I could just ask the first question, Mr. Steyer. The House of Representatives passed a major trade bill this past week, first major trade bill passed since 2005, USMCA. Unions, Mr. Trumpka, AFL-CIO, endorsed the bill. White House would like the bill. Many Democrats obviously voted for the bill, as well as Republicans in the House. I think 385 members voted for it. Sherrod Brown never voted for a trade bill, and the Senate says, this is something that I think I can embrace and support and vote for. If you were the president, would you sign that bill?
Well, let me say this. If I were the president, I would never have negotiated that bill. And let me explain why. Because I understand the point about workers, organized labor, and what actually went into that bill to make it acceptable to union leaders around the country. So let's take a step back and talk about actual trade bills and how we think about them. I mean, the basic understanding of trade has been that trade is good in the world, that the more trade there is, the faster the growth is, and that basically different countries get to excel in their areas, and as a result, trade works for everybody. I mean, that's the basic Econ 101 theory about trade. So let's talk about how trade works in the real world, which is, that's true, but what's ended up happening with trade bills is it has been good for GDP, but we've looked at trade bills in terms of GDP instead of looking at in terms of it also in terms of who's benefiting from GDP and what the impacts are in terms of the different people in society. That's why unions were screaming about NAFTA. They thought it may be good for the corporations and the GDP, but it's going to hurt working people in the United States. That's what the fight was about in terms of USMCA. That in fact, what we've seen focusing on GDP, which we've done for the last 40 years, has an implicit assumption in it that GDP is shared equally between people in society. And what we know is that's not true. Is that over the last 40 years, the richest people have gotten all the increased income in the United States of America. And well over 90% of Americans haven't had a raise in 2 generations. So if you think that isn't success, if you value people equally, which we're supposed to do in a democracy last I checked. So this trade bill actually did work on this, and they went back and redid it to try and make sure that it would work for working people in the United States. But the other complaint about trade bills traditionally has been that they haven't dealt with the environment, that in effect, we allow other countries to do manufacturing in ways that are environmentally destructive, and therefore we're sort of exporting our pollution to other countries. And at some level, that falls apart in terms of climate. Because when you talk about climate, the pollution in China is also the pollution in the United States. The pollution in Mexico and Canada is also the pollution in the United States. So if you look at this trade bill, what Jim said is exactly true. I think virtually every union came on and supported the bill in the way that was rewritten. But all of the environmental groups fought it and are opposed to it Because the other issue has been, if we're going to do trade, we have to do it in a way that will actually preserve the natural world. And so when I look at this bill, it brings up the idea, who's at the table really matters. You know the old saying, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. Well, I can tell you, climate was on the menu. It's not mentioned in this bill. So in fact, when we think about what we're going to accomplish around the world, if we don't have climate as a primary, I would honestly say the primary point of our international relations, we're not going to solve climate. And if you guys have been reading just the last week's information about what's going on in the natural world in terms of the Amazon, you can go back if you want to have a sleepless night, read about the Amazon and where we are. And if you want to just take a look at a picture, take a look at Sydney, where you literally, it's completely surrounded by the smoke from the fires. Australia is on fire. It was 107 degrees average in the country last week. So actually, Jim, if I were going to do that bill, they redid it based on working people. They should redo it based on climate. Because these people need our market. They don't want our market. They can't survive without our market. And we have to use that to make sure that they're behaving in ways that serve the people of the United States. So I would renegotiate that bill on climate, period. And I believe that you have to have working people at the table to make sure that those concerns are really met in the real world. And you need people who are going to worry about climate to make sure that those concerns are met in the real world. And if you don't, then you get presented a bill that has positive things about it compared to where we are, and also has things that are completely unacceptable. And that is I mean, we have a president who would never think about using the word climate, who at the International Climate Conference, America was there to try and sabotage the conference. All I can say is that we're talking about the health and safety of every American citizen in terms of dealing with this in a smart and effective way. And at some point, you know, it's exactly like everything else. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. We have to do this, we can do it, and we can do it in a way that makes us richer and healthier. But if we don't do it, then we put ourselves at grave risk for as far as the eye can see.
If I could ask just one further question. The DNC is going to increase the standard eligibility for people to be on the next debate. And there are some people who are saying that there's no diversity at all in these debates, and that we should revisit the standard, maybe lower it, and allow people like Cory Booker or Julian Castro to be back on the stage to give the richness that reflects the diversity of the American public. Your thoughts on what the DNC should do?
Well, they're in a tough spot, I gotta say. After Kamala Harris withdrew, I wrote an open letter, I think that day or at latest the next day, to say that they should lower the requirements so we'd have a larger and more diverse group of people on stage. Because I do think it's important to hear a diversity of opinions, and I think we have a very diverse, thank God, Democratic Party. And I think I like people to hear as many messages and as many truths as they can and get to make up their own minds. And I know that's not in my interest. My interest is to have the game of musical chairs to continue as fast as possible. But I think in the interest of the Democratic Party and Democratic primary voters, I push for them to actually loosen the requirements and get a bigger group of people and a more diverse group. And they obviously did what they always do, which is not exactly listen to me.
So we have the roving mics, and if you just raise your hand and identify yourself. I believe we have a good friend from AARP here with a question.
Good morning and welcome to New Hampshire.
And will you remind everybody of your name, just so?
My name is Mary Roberge, and I am a volunteer with AARP New Hampshire. And my question is basically about prescription drugs. We all know that the cost of prescription drugs is continually rising. We have all had personal stories of friends or relatives who have had to make some difficult choices and have also been in some very difficult situations health-wise because they could not afford their prescription drugs. What would you do to hold drug companies accountable for the high cost of prescription drugs?
So, Mary, I started by saying I'm running for president because I think that corporations have bought the government. And if you wanted one of the many obvious cases, the drug companies are a pretty good argument for that. You know, we pay, it's not just that we pay high prices, we pay many multiples of what other countries pay for the exact same drug. And I know people in New Hampshire know that we can pay 10 times as much as Canada, and then they wrote a law to say you can't drive to Canada to buy the drugs. And the more you know about how drugs are priced in the United States, the angrier you get. Because there's the price, and then there's the inability to go anywhere else to buy it, but this common behavior in terms of maintaining high monopoly prices based on patents when it's no longer appropriate, when you hear about the behavior that's common in order to continue that, it's upsetting. Because you realize we're getting ripped off. And the government doesn't represent the people of the United States to stand up for us. Every other government negotiates really hard. That's why they pay a fraction of what we pay. And let me say this. I understand that drug companies do research and come up with new molecules, and we're going to get a lot of new drugs in the 21st century, thank God. But there's something going on here that's absolutely flagrant at the expense of Americans. And so it's absolutely critical that our government be working on behalf of the citizens, not of the profit lines of drug companies. And so what would I do? Look, I happen to be in the larger case. I'm one of the people who believes in a public option, not in Medicare for all. And I could take you through that. But we can't wait for that. Yeah, I'm just saying, we can't wait for that. So what I would do is I would negotiate very hard on drug pricing. And I would use the power of the United States government to buy, to push these people, because what they're doing isn't appropriate. And for reasons that are obvious, we haven't done that. And so when I think about what they charge us relative to other countries, the United States government is a gigantic purchaser, and we have the ability to drive down these prices for Americans, period. We don't do it. If I were there, I promise you, to me, I am a competitive person. I am 100% on the side of the American citizens here. We have a lot of power that we're not using over these drug companies. I would use it. And it's like a negotiation. They are killing us, sometimes literally, and it's not right. And so I have no qualms whatsoever about pushing back. And they're gonna make arguments about needing money for research, and they're bogus. And so I would push really, really hard on drug pricing, and I would push really hard, especially after the 7 years of the original patent, because this is something where they are really extending prices. If you looked, there were hundreds of drug prices that went up on January 1 of this year. It's completely unrelated to anything but wanting more money. There's no cost increase. It's just a question of what they can get away with the American government. And we have an enormous amount of power to push back. And I would push back really, really, really hard. Because our healthcare in general is twice as expensive as it should be. And this is an absolutely egregious case of getting ripped off compared to every other country. 10 times for insulin, what we pay compared to Canada. We pay 100 times what Australians pay for some drugs, 100 times. That's unconscionable. And so we have to take it seriously, but I'm telling you, I'm running for president because I believe these corporations own the government, and I want structural change like term limits and direct democracy, because I want to change their ability to run the government and start thinking that healthcare is actually about serving the American people, not about promoting profit lines for drug companies and insurance companies and private hospitals.
questions for Mr. Steyer? Yes, ma'am. Just identify yourself.
Trudy Avery, Karen Treatment Centers, and I'm originally from Bay Ridge, Brooklyn. I'm actually here today from Cape Cod, and I just want to know, you talk so much about big business. We're in the opiate epidemic because of what big business has done in the pharmaceutical industry. And then on the other side, big business trying to save money by not providing the treatment that our next generation needs for addiction. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Not only do I work in the field, but I am the mother of a 32-year-old son in long-term recovery who is doing very well today because I was forced to sue our health insurer in order to access treatment. Took him to the state attorney general and won my case.
So, Trudy, you've had this very personal experience. I think almost everybody has been touched by this at one step removed. You know, my best friend from growing up is a dead heroin addict. So I have no illusions about how this plays out. So you asked two different questions. One was about what to do about opioid addiction and how to treat the drug companies who fostered it and profited from it. I mean, one of the things I think to change behavior is, I know those people are going to pay huge fines, but that seems to me to be criminal behavior. If you go into a room and conspire to addict American citizens to an opioid and think of that as a legitimate business practice, I think we have to change your mind. And I think there's been a sense overall that if you do it in a corporate setting, it may be a fine, it may be a civil penalty, but it's not a criminal violation. I just don't think we can do that anymore. I think that people have to be sitting in rooms saying, am I doing the right thing? Am I obeying the law? And I think this is a perfect example, because when you read the notes of those meetings, it does curl your hair to think about what people said, and without real attention to the consequences for American citizens. So one thing I'd say is, you have to put criminal sanctions on the table and have the Justice Department look at it and pursue it, for starters. In terms of 72,000 people died of opioid overdoses last year. You know, that is a gigantic number. And the only reason it was so low was because there are new drugs that can stop you when you're having an overdose from dying. So this is obviously a gigantic problem. Let me say that I do support you in your thinking that this is a health issue, where we need to support the people in this from a health standpoint, and I propose putting $75 billion a year into that. But I also think, in addition, this country is suffering from a lot of mental health pain. And separately, I would also put a lot of money into that in a way that we haven't. That I think that this is an example of the mental health pain that people are undergoing here. And it's specific, like every single example is specific, but I think we actually need to address it, focus on it, resource it, and deal with the pain people are feeling around the country, and particularly in New Hampshire. And let me say this. There was just a study out, which was very painful, I don't know if you saw it, which said that for the third year in a row, American life expectancy went down. For the third year in a row. And New Hampshire's life expectancy for people between 25 and 60 went down the most of any state in the country. And the reasons were all health related, but 3 of the top 4 were alcoholism, opioids, and suicide. And I know that that's a really uncomfortable thing to talk about, and I know this is the holiday season. But let's talk about, this is, when I talk about the country coming together about climate, when I talk about partisanship and what I believe in, I believe there's a gigantic need in America for purpose. What are we doing as a country? What do we stand for? Who are we? What does being an American mean? Traditionally, being an American was about leading the world for freedom, justice, and equality. That's what being an American is. And that we're the moral leaders of the world who stand up for democracy and freedom and the sanctity of human beings. And that's gone. I mean, we have a president who absolutely doesn't believe one word of that. But when I talk about climate, what I'm really talking about is the United States going back to our traditional role of leading the world. And when I think about people in despair in this country, that's what those numbers mean, really, is that people don't feel like there's a purpose that they have for walking around the earth on two legs. And what we're talking about is, if there's a bigger purpose that you can imagine for all of us than to actually take on the biggest challenge and save the world, I don't know what it is. And it's not a fake. We actually have to do this together. And it is an absolute gift of meaning for everybody's life. So when I think about somebody, if I think about my dead friend, if I could have said to him, Dean, here's what we're going to do. We need you to do this. I know that there's some hard things in your life, but we need to do this together. That's what I want to say to everyone in the United States. There is a purpose for what we're doing on this planet. There is something that Americans do differently from everyone else in the world. And we have to do it, so let's do it. And let's take incredible joy in doing it. Let's succeed together. That is what I think we need to do. That is what we're missing. God did not put us on this planet about GDP per capita. There is a bigger purpose to the United States of America. And that's really what I think the solution to this problem is. Hey, you guys, could I just tell you a funny story? So my dad and mom got married, I think, in 1953. So the week before he got married, my father went to go gambling in Nevada, which was the only place in the time he could go gambling. And they went to Lake Tahoe, to North Shore of Lake Tahoe. And he went with Vin Broderick's uncle, Joe Broderick. So then they come back from a week of gambling and playing golf. My father gets married. Joe Broderick becomes a Catholic priest. It was his last hurrah also. Until he married a nun. And now I've always thought I could see these two guys.
Their brother was on the board here at St. Anselm.
Is that right? So I'm just saying, life can be super, super, super fun in a very pure way.
Have a gentleman here. Just identify yourself.
My name's Dustin Ward. Good morning, Tom. So my question, and being a veteran, it's important to me, the United States Constitution. At one point, I swore an oath to uphold and defend that. And this being a constitutional republic, and we have a Bill of Rights. And I guess my question is real simple to you. Are you going to, if you are elected, are you going to uphold the U.S. Constitution and the Bill of Rights up to and including the Second Amendment?
So Dustin, let me start by saying what I think is only fair. Thank you for being a vet. Thank you for your service. Everyone who does that deserves a hand. And out of some sense of responsibility, I recently reread the Constitution of the United States, including the Second Amendment. So let's talk about the Second Amendment, which is obviously the right to bear arms. And here's what I think about this. And let me say that I raise grass-finished cattle, pigs, and chickens. And on our ranch, we give gun safety lessons so that anyone who lives around there for free can come and be a safe gun owner and, basically get hunting licenses. We also have gun violence in this country at levels that are unbearable. And I think people focus on the mass shootings, where we're off the charts compared to every other country. We'll have 400 mass shootings this year in the United States of America. You can read about them every single day in the paper. But in the next country, in terms of mass shootings, we'll have 400. The next country will be Mexico, which will be probably 5. We also have spousal abuse, gun-related spousal abuse, streets that people are scared to walk down. And we have to remember that 60% of gun-related deaths are suicides. So what do I think about the Second Amendment? I believe in the Second Amendment, but I also believe in protecting the people of the United States. So what does that look like? For one thing, Over 90% of Americans, including more Republicans percentage-wise than Democrats, and 70% of NRA members want background checks on guns, gun purchases, so that if you fall into the category of felon, convicted spousal abuser, or certifiably having mental problems, you can't buy a gun. That hasn't happened because gun companies actually control the NRA and they don't want it to happen. But if you look at what I'm talking about, I don't think we're abridging anyone's Second Amendment rights to ask for background checks. I would license gun owners the way we license people who drive cars. People have a right to drive a car, but you have to be able to be licensed and safe. I would register assault weapons so that we'd know where they are. I would have voluntary but not mandatory buybacks of guns, because this is really about the number of guns in society, and make sure they're in the hands of people don't put into these categories of people who can't have them. So the real answer, Dustin, when I think about guns, we have an enormous number of guns in society, and a lot of it's done on a state basis. And when you actually look at how things work out in the states where there are fewer guns per capita, there's less gun violence. So I don't want to take away people's rights to own guns. I'm a gun owner too. But I want to make sure that we do it in a much, much, much safer way. And we are at a stage where, let's face it, they're doing active shooter drills in first grade. That's a level of fear in our society that's damaging and inappropriate, if I may use unemotional terms. So I think we're balancing the Second Amendment with the rights of people to be safe and to feel safe. And I look at it a little bit the way, the famous example of there's freedom of speech in the United States, and that's in the Bill of Rights. But you don't get to yell fire in a crowded theater, because that's putting other people at risk. And that's how I feel about guns. I want to respect the Second Amendment, but I don't want to allow somebody to call fire in a crowded theater and put at risk hundreds of other people.
Young lady, just wait for the mic. Identify yourself.
Good morning, and thank you for being here. Our state, New Hampshire, is an aging state. Of course, not the people in this room, however, but second in the nation, only to Maine. So we have some concerns that affect our aging populations, which is the ability to live independently in communities as we age. There are transportation issues, there are affordable housing issues, there are limited income issues that all restrict and constrain people's ability to do that. What would you do, if elected, to help that population stay in their communities?
So you've asked a series of questions, so I'm going to go down. And will you remind me of your name, ma'am? Nice to see you. Let me start with one that is an obvious one that you didn't specifically refer to, but you indirectly referred to, which is Social Security. Look, Social Security is, for 75% of seniors, is their main source of income. For something like 40% of seniors, it's their sole source of income. So the idea that the Social Security Trust Fund is going to go bankrupt and that we're going to cut benefits has to be completely off the table. That just cannot happen in the United States of America. We cannot have made a promise to seniors, to a huge number of people who have been citizens their whole life, and then renege. Cannot happen. And so we can talk about the different ways, and I'd be happy to make sure that that never happens, but that has to be off the table. That's for starters. Secondly, in terms of affordable housing, we have 7 million too few affordable housing units in the United States of America. The government, basically, the federal government pretty much got out of the housing business, assuming that with incentives, the market would take care of it. And actually, we can see, I live in the center of homelessness in the United States, known as the Golden State of California. And so we can see what happens when you have too few housing units and it drives up prices. And so for people on fixed incomes or limited incomes, they get driven out of the market, and there's no real answer. That's why we have so many homeless people. That's one of the upshots. So part of what I'm proposing to do is in 2 different ways address the overall housing problem. One is by literally putting tens of billions of dollars a year into building houses, and the other is we have to rebuild the country from a climate standpoint. So part of our climate plan is about climate smart housing, so that we actually have to make sure that we're building literally 7 million units around the United States to get supply and demand back into equilibrium so that people aren't driven out across the country. And I can tell you, if you're feeling it in New Hampshire, I promise you we're feeling it in San Francisco. And they're feeling it in Charleston, South Carolina. People are feeling this across the country. It's, this really is Econ 101, supply and demand. Too many people who need to live in a house, too few houses, the price goes up. So that's something we absolutely have to do. In terms of healthcare, we're talking, every one of these things is a reaction in my mind to what Ronald Reagan said in 1980. Look, we are still going off the Reagan model of the United States of America, which involves all taxes are bad, government itself is bad. The market will take care of it. The market is efficient and just. Unions are bad, and trickle-down works. It turns out that every single one of those things I completely disagree with, and I think we've got 40 years of data to say, actually, you're wrong. And so this is a perfect case where the government has to step in on behalf of seniors. And there's no question about it. And the only question is, how are we going to pay for it? And how are we going to focus on it? And if you've looked at what I've said, and I know that people from New Hampshire do their homework, but I'll just say it really quickly in case you skimmed that part of the lesson. I'm for a wealth tax. I've been saying that for over a year, long before I was running for president. I think it's the only way really to deal with the inequity, the redistribution to rich people of money all over this country for 40 years. I'm for undoing the tax breaks to the richest people and the biggest corporations that they've pushed through. I'm actually for treating investment income, the passive investment income, the same way as you treat ordinary income for people who go to work every morning. And I'm for cutting tax. Believe it, if we do those things, we can get these programs and cut taxes by 10% for 95% of Americans. So I'm for a redo. I believe we've seen gross injustice for 40 years. I've definitely profited from it. It's one of the reasons I took the Giving Pledge, was I felt this isn't right. But I think going forward, we have to stand up for the people of the United States. And really, that's what you're talking about here across the board. Listen to you guys, I love doing this.
If I could just
They're
ask-
going to have to take me out of here.
Yeah. If I could ask one question, Mr. Steyer, the House of Representatives has impeached the president, but the Speaker has held back and sent in the resolution to the Senate until I think she feels there's going to be a fair process in the trial. Your thoughts on what should be done now?
So I was pushing a petition because I believe that impeachment is not about the House of Representatives or the Senate. I've always believed the people who count are the people of the United States. And I did a petition because I know for sure that nobody in the House of Representatives is going to listen to me, but if they have 50,000 of their constituents who care, who sign a petition and go write them letters, they'll care a lot. So this was always about trying to give voice to the people of the United States. And I believe that those people pushed the Congress to do the right thing and not to look at it just a question of their reelection, which is how they were looking at it, but to look at it in terms of right and wrong, that we have the most corrupt president in history, so do the right thing, because if you don't do the right thing, then the rule of law doesn't really mean a lot. If the rich and powerful aren't subject to the rule of law, then the rule of law isn't really exist in the United States, and that's a terrible thing. So now we are where he's been impeached, and the majority leader of the Senate has said, I don't intend to do a fair job. Amazing. And Lindsey Graham has said, I'm not trying to be fair here. Really? So what Speaker Pelosi is trying to do is use the leverage she has to try and see whether the Senate will have a trial, not so much to convince the senators, but so the people of the United States can see what happened. You know, this president has refused to allow members of his administration to obey subpoenas, which is the law that they have to obey, to go in front of the American people and testify about what happened under oath on TV, so we can see. That's what I'm for. And so anything that will get that to happen, to get the people who know in front of the TV cameras so the people of the United States can see what happened. That's what I care about. Because I'll tell you, the only way we're going to ever get Republican senators to actually look at their conscience is if their constituents say to them, get rid of them or we'll get rid of you. You know what we call that? That's called democracy. Because I can tell you this, Lindsey Graham will stop talking about breaking his oath of office in public the minute the people of South Carolina say to him, Lindsey, keep talking and you're out. That's the words he can understand. And that's what, if you guys remember, for those of us in AARP, if you remember 1974, that's what happened. The people of the United States said to the senators, get rid of him, or I can remember, or we'll get rid of you. And I remember my parents saying, he lied, he's got to go. Nothing to discuss about this. Nixon lied, he has to go. But they got to see it on TV. They got a chance to hear everybody in that administration testify under oath. They all went to jail. But the American people got to see the truth on their TV screens. And we made up our mind, and that's actually what made the difference. And that's what I'm asking for here. Put the people in charge. You guys, last night was the first night of Hanukkah. Christmas is in 2 days. Could we please have a joyous and loving holiday season? Good grief. It's a fantastic time. Thank you so much. I can't believe you came out on December 23rd. You must be insane. Thank you so much. Really, really, really fun.
Well done, brother. You did all right, huh? Got a little gift for you.